Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Great to welcome you all again this week, and our outside guests who are watching in via simulcast and via the recorded YouTube talks. It's a real pleasure to welcome Harry Vereecken to Saskatoon this week. Harry is coming from Jülich in Germany, where he's professor at the University of Bonn in the Faculty of Agriculture, but he's also the director of this institute, Agrosphere Institute, a Helmholtz Institute in Jülich, where he pretty much created this institute in 2000. And it's grown now to about 130 employees and 40, I think, PhD students that Harry supervises officially. So quite a big job. And Harry's going to tell us today about some of the new developments in soil moisture measurement and observations. Harry is really a pioneer in this field in terms of developing analytical and numerical methods for modeling water and solute transport. He's done some of the seminal work in terms of remote sensing applications for soil moisture. And in the graduate class today, we talked about some of these works as linked to a review article that we read. And he's really been one of the main architects, I think, of the application of geophysics in hydrology, and in particular, geophysical applications to monitoring soil moisture patterns. For this work, he's received the Soil Science Society of America Kirkham Award, which is really the signature award in the field. Harry is also co-editor of the Vedo Zone Journal, and it's a real pleasure to have him with us today. Harry.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for this nice words and also for the invitation and the opportunity to give this talk. Saltwater content and hydrological fluxes in terrestrial systems. And what I want to tell you is how we go from observation to prediction of these hydrological fluxes. And I will start with the soil moisture, and I think many of you are aware that soil moisture is, of course, a key variable in the global water cycle. Not only the global water cycle, but also the energy cycle, as it also controls the exchange of water and energy between the land surface and the atmosphere. And the difficulty with soil moisture basically is not that it is difficult to measure. I mean, if you go into the field and you take a core and you weigh it and you dry it and you weigh it, you have the soil moisture content. So it's basically a very simple property to measure. The issue is that it is highly variable in space and time. And so if you want to have a spatial coverage of soil moisture, then it becomes much more difficult to measure, because then you use other types of methods to get to the soil moisture content, and they do not directly measure it. It's always then an electromagnetic property that's behind it, and that needs to be translated. And here you see some of the available measurement techniques that presently are being used to map soil moisture in space and time. And here is a spatial support, and here is a sensor type. And typically people that come from soil physics, soil science, are very familiar with the small-scale measurement techniques. These are the capacitance probes, this is TDR, this is the simple sampling. And then you have, of course, the satellite-based systems that use electromagnetic waves to measure the permittivity of the system, and that is then translated into soil moisture content. And somewhere in between, there is a gap. There is a gap between the point-scale measurements and the remote sensing methods. And what I will try to explain is, or present, are some of the methods that might help in bridging this gap between local scale measurements and remote sensing measurements. And what I will tell also a bit about are the geophysical methods that are available at the field scale, also perhaps a bit the larger field scale, to get information about soil moisture dynamics, spatial and temporal variability. Now, just to the principles. If you look at radiometer and GPR systems, ground penetrating radar at the field scale, you have basically two big principles. You have the radiometer, which is a passive system. That means it measures the emission of electromagnetic waves in the high frequency domain due to the emission of heat from the soil into the atmosphere. And the system measures then passively the brightness temperature, and the brightness temperature is translated into moisture content via the permittivity. Or you have an active system. And an active system emits actively electromagnetic waves, and it measures the reflection of these electromagnetic waves, and you get information about the dielectric constant, and that is proportional to the water content. So these systems have been developed in the past. You have them ground-based and you have them on satellite platforms. And a combination of both systems will be launched next year by NASA, 2014, called the SMAP mission, a passive-active system globally for the whole world with a frequency of return frequency of 3 days and a spatial resolution of 3 kilometers of soil moisture, which is already an advance compared to some of the satellites that have a resolution of 30 kilometers. And it becomes now more applicable also for the smaller scale studies. Now, what can we do with such systems? We can mount them on a car, and we can measure, when the car moves, the soil moisture content of the surface layer. This is, in this case, a passive system that is mounted on the truck, and that can be, let's say, moved around on the field site, and you can get information about soil moisture content. This is a setup that we are testing now, mainly for also in the framework of the SMAP mission, that you have both systems, passive and active. And they point at the same plot, and we try to use this information to evaluate the value of having passive and active systems. And here is an Albara system, or a Yulbara, which is a radiometer mounted on a tower here. It's about 10 meters. And it allows you to move around and to look at different soil roughnesses, because soil roughness plays an important role in deriving soil moisture content. Depends whether your soil is plowed or non-plowed. These roughness effects have an impact on the retrieval of soil moisture. So, and this is what you can get out of it. This is a field site, and we just irrigated it, a bit more of water, a bit less of water, and no water. And there are different measurement systems that we have used. Here is the combination of the passive system and the active radar system. And this is what one can get from the ground-penetrating radar. That would be this system here. This is the radiometer, shown here. And then we have the classical method called TDR, used in soil physics, which is a point-scale measurement to map soil moisture. And what you can see is, if one is optimistic, the TDR can pretty nice retrieve the soil moisture conditions at the field. The same, but to a lesser extent, is true for the GPR, and you can see that with the radiometer with an average polarization, we do not really get the patterns very well. And then if you compare, here you see the soil moisture content at the x-axis, and here the soil moisture content retrieved from the GPR, the same here from the TDR and the radiometer. You see that we of course have a bias and a scatter in our observations, and that the scatter of the radar is much larger than the scatter of the radiometer. Then this has to do with soil roughness effects. And you see that there is also a kind of a bias in there, and that the bias is somewhat larger for the radiometer system. So it's all a matter of what is important is at what depth and measurement volume are you looking. And typically, and that is the difficulty in the comparisons, each system has its own measurement volume and depth, and that differs, and that makes any comparison very difficult. And it is also true for the remote sensing platforms, is that depending on which satellite platform you have, which frequency, you see different things with respect to soil moisture. So comparisons are always notoriously very difficult, but it shows us that we can have non-invasive techniques available that are able to map soil moisture and that at least are comparable with each other. This is some of the work we have been doing in subsurface mapping of properties, and for that we use also ground-penetrating radar systems, but these are antennas that are lowered into boreholes. And this is a typical borehole, and we lower a transmitter and a receiver. And what we do is we use the full wave inversion. That means we solve the Maxwell equations and the measurement system to obtain information about electrical conductivity, and we can derive from that porosity. And what one can see is here, these are the boreholes. This is the depth, the distance, it's about 6 meters. And we are able to resolve the subsurface without sampling. So this is the conductivity, and we can also get permittivity, and from that we can derive porosity. And then you can see the subsurface structures between the two boreholes, and this information is very important if you are doing subsurface flow modeling. So these techniques allow you to get information about subsurface properties which are important for flow and transport processes. Now, what I've been telling up to now is measuring state variables and material properties. Now, typically, what we are interested in are properties of the soil, namely the moisture release characteristic, or PF curve, and the hydraulic conductivity, so the capacity of the soil to transport water. And what we do is, we start with a hydrological model, and we say these are our properties, and then we calculate the soil moisture dynamics at different depths in the soil profile. And then we use petrophysical relationships to map the moisture content into electromagnetic properties. And this is a key step. This is what makes it important to have a good petrophysical relationships, to have a good transfer from hydrology into electromagnetics. And then we use an electromagnetic model of the antenna, of the whole system, to calculate the signal that the GPR is measuring. So basically we solve the Maxwell equations, we get Green's functions, the system measures Green's functions, we predict Green's functions, and then we are just optimizing, and the optimization is in function of the hydraulic parameters. And this is a kind of a loop, a cycle. So we start with the first estimate, we calculate water content, we transfer into electromagnetic properties, we calculate what the radar is seeing, and then we optimize until we get an optimal set of hydraulic parameters for the first layer. So this is basically an inverse way of determining non-invasively the moisture retention characteristic and the hydraulic conductivity of a soil. Now, I will try to explain you some of the applications that we have done with these hydrogeophysical techniques. And here you see a lysimeter system. It's a weighable lysimeter system, and it's fully monitored with electrodes here for ERT, and we are doing tracer experiments in these soil columns. We also go to the field site, and here you see access tubes into the soil horizontally, in which we can bring in radar antennas, emitter and receiver, and get information about the subsurface soil water content. And we are basically interested in how does the water content change when plants are taking up water. And then the next step is then going to a bit more difficult situations on a field site here in case of Thailand. The key is when one applies, for instance, the electrical resistivity tomography, which is basically you inject the current, you measure the resistivity, and once you have the resistivity or the conductivity, you have to map it into a soil moisture content. So you need a calibration curve that tells you how the electrical conductivity that you measure is related to the water content. And this, of course, you can see, depends on the different soil materials that you have. So key is always you need information on how to transfer your electromagnetic property, in this case the electrical conductivity, in water content. This is the box at the bottom that I showed. And this is quite important, otherwise it will be very difficult to use ERT to derive moisture content status of the soil. And so, sorry, to see if okay, apparently, okay, I can do it with this. So what you see here, what is possible, for instance, with ERT and a tracer, this is a cut, a plane cut through an aquifer system. And we have injected the tracer, and these are the different wells. And what you see is the breakthrough of the tracer, of the solute plume, when it goes through this plane. And this is done by ERT, and what the nice thing is that you can see that the plume splits up. And that tells you that there are structures that are less conductive and that you are able to show. So this is really an online monitoring without sampling of a breakthrough of a tracer thrust in groundwater. And we can also use it for salt movement in lysimeters or for the quantitative monitoring of root water uptake in lysimeters. And here you see a root water uptake of a plant on a lysimeter, and you see the changes in water content due to the root water uptake. And this is just the vertical depth, and this is averaged water content, and this is the time. And you can see that this is, check here, this is the water content and the change of water content in time. So again, better explained here, the water loss, you see here the vertical depth. This is the averaged water content across the plane in the lysimeter. This is the days. And you see here the rate of water uptake going from 0.01 cubic centimeter per cubic centimeter a day till minus 0.01. And you can see how the plant is taking up water, and this is a comparison between the TDR system, which is a system that is invasive, that is a kind of a reference, and that is what the ERT is delivering. And you can see that there is a good agreement between both systems. So that what it tells you is here that ERT is basically able to retrieve the soil moisture dynamics in a 3D volume with a plant crop, with a crop on it, compared to what the TDR, the classical system, is measuring. And here you see we have also in this lysimeter system the rhizotubes here, where you can then also monitor the root growth and relate root growth to water uptake. And this is what is shown here. Typically, what is assumed is that the root length density is proportional to the root water uptake. And that means the more roots you have, the more water typically is taken up by the plant. This does not always match, and this is shown by ERT here, where you can see here, this is the root length densities, and this is the rate of water loss. And you can see that it is not always the case where you have the highest root length density, that this is the place where most of the water is being taken up or redistributed. And this is important because many of the climate models, many of our models that we use in hydrology assume a relationship between root length density and water uptake. And this means that based on these data, we have to be very careful in making this assumption, and we probably will need other approaches to better characterize root water uptake. Now, this has been work that has been done mostly in the lab under well-controlled conditions. I mean, your mass balances are okay, your salt is contained because you need salt as a tracer to do ERT. What happens now if you go to the field scale? And in this case, we investigated the effect of mist cropping systems on water content in the subsurface. And we looked at different systems. This is a mice monocropping system, and this is a hedgerow intercropping system with different crops on the surface. And we have been using ERT to map in time the change of water content in these systems. And here you see is a version of a bare soil. Here is the version with homogeneous crop, corn, and fertilization. And here you have a hedgerow system where you have corn, chili, and lutetia, and fertilized, no fertilization. And what you can see here are the changes in moisture content for the different systems. Of course, the bare soil, nothing much is happening. But here for the maize monocropping, you see the red one is the loss of water in the system, and you see how it increases with time. So the crop is taking up more water, and we can do that in a quantitative manner. So we can really say how much water is being lost at a certain moment in time at a certain depth. And you see also the differences between the different cropping systems. So that tells us that ERT is a viable tool to be applied at the field scale to look at root water uptake processes. So that means also that you can use this information to validate some of the models at the field scale. And then you can plot, again, the same way. You have the plant rows here, and then you have the different dates, and this is the soil moisture content, and you see these integrated changes for the different treatments, and you see, of course, then that we have a different soil moisture dynamics depending on the type of cropping system that we have, and that we are able to monitor these data. Let me come now to the next step. This was mainly on the hydrogeophysical methods. We go now to a next step, and this is some of the work that we have been doing in Germany in our terrestrial environmental observatories, which were established in 2008. And this is one of these observatories. It's a Catchment. It's about 2,300 square kilometers. And we have some intensive monitoring sites here, but at several locations we also have streamflow data which we follow up and which we want to interpret. And I will explain you a bit of some of the work that is ongoing with techniques to measure soil moisture content. And well, the system, it's part of 4 of these observatories that we have in Germany. It has a known weather radar system, so we have full coverage of the rainfall. We have several adicovariance stations to measure the energy exchange between the land surface and the atmosphere. It gives you information about evapotranspiration. And then we have various systems in the subsurface that allows us to monitor what is ongoing with soil moisture in the subsurface. And this is an example of a waterhead catchment. It's about 22 hectares large. And we have here, the yellow dots here are soil moisture measurement systems that we have installed. It's a wireless network. That means at 3 different depths we have capacitance sensors that automatically measure every 10 minutes the soil moisture content. It's put into a router system and then to a central router and then to the computer at the research center. We have eddy flux towers. We measure groundwater levels and quality. We have weighable altimeter systems, and last month we had also a deforestation experiment here. So part of the spruce was removed and will be replaced by beech. So it's also kind of an experimental laboratory that we have here. Now what I will explain you is a bit what we have been doing with the soil moisture sensor network. And so here are the routers, and this is every location, every yellow dot here has 6 sensors at 5, 20, and 50 centimeters, measuring the water content, the electrical conductivity, and soil temperature. Every 10 minutes, so you can calculate after 2 to 3, 4 years, you have millions of soil moisture data. And then always the questions come, what is one going to do with this large amount of data? And here is just an example of the dynamics of soil moisture at 2 different depths, one at 5 centimeters, one at 20 centimeters. And the bluer it gets, the wetter it is, the more reddish, the drier. And here you see, of course, the river or the creek system, riparian zone, which is always quite wet. And these are the uphill regions where when the soil dries out, of course, it gets dry. And the interesting thing is, for those who are a bit familiar with geostatistics, is you can plot the variance of the soil moisture content. And what you will see is, the variance is what you see here, it's going up and down. So the variance, when it is very wet, the variance decreases. If it starts drying out, the variance of soil moisture content, the spatial variance, increases. And when it dries out further, it decreases again. So it's a typical behavior of a bounded value between porosity and complete dryness. And so this is shown here with these variograms. This SIL, which is basically the variance of the system, changes in function of the water status of the system. And then you can make these nice plots. This is the mean soil water content plotted versus the standard deviation of all the measurements at a certain moment in time. So here, if you have 40 volumetric percent of water, then this is the variance that you can get. And you can see that this variance depends on the season where you're in. So it doesn't mean that if you have the same mean soil water content for your system, that the variance is the same. And there are different processes that control that, and I will come later to that. You can also see the effect of the groundwater level on these curves and on the spatial variability. And these are groundwater distant, that is so where the groundwater is not close to the soil surface. And here is where we have locations that are groundwater influenced. And you see, of course, that there is an effect on the spatial variability. And then, of course, here is shown for the different depths. You have the largest variability near the soil surface, and your variability decreases within the soil surface, with soil depth, sorry. Now, I've shown that there is a seasonal effect, but there is also an event scale effect. And what is shown here is you have, at a certain moment in time, you have a rainfall event that wettens this small catchment. And by wetting, your variability increases. Up to a certain level, after rainfall has stopped, it starts basically already decreasing here, and at a certain moment we have the drying loop, and the drying results in a lower variance compared to the wetting. And we have been puzzled what could be the reason for that. And the reason is basically, here you see again kind of an hysteresis loop, and we looked at 3 different mean saltwater contents. And for instance here, this is the mean saltwater content of 42%. This is the drying, this is the wetting. So the drying is here the blue, and the wetting is the red. And if you look at the wetting, at the probability distribution of soil moisture, you see that it's bimodal. And there's a kind of a measure for the bimodality. This is Ashman's factor. If it's larger than 2, it's bimodal. Smaller than 2, it's more unimodal. And you can see that all the wetting events are clearly bimodal. And all the drying events tend to be unimodal. And this is, let's say, the drying event at the 45, where we are here. And you see that it almost becomes unimodal. That means as soon as the system starts drying, the bimodality is compressed, and you get a lower variance. And this is then is shown here in the figure, and you have the largest difference here. You see, this is 2.6 compared to 1.9. This is there also where we have the largest deviation in the variance. So that tells us that univariate description of soil moisture at the field scale with a Gaussian distribution does not always work. It depends upon the status where you are in, and it might dynamically change from time to time. We have been working on the cosmic ray technology. Cosmic ray technology, we have deployed, well, now for the moment, about 10 of these sensors. And the idea of a cosmic ray sensor is quite simple. It measures basically the cosmic rays enter into the soil and leave or make them to emit neutrons. Fast neutrons out of the soil, and the amount of neutrons that is released from the soil is proportional to the soil water content. And the principle is very simple. The drier the soil, the more neutrons are being emitted. The more wet it is, the more they are attenuated, the less neutrons are leaving the soil. So the proportionality lies in the fact that you count the neutrons. Is the count very high? You typically have a dry soil. If the count is low, you have a wet soil. And so we have been working on this method to measure the effective soil moisture content of such a cosmic ray sensor. Because what it measures, it gives you one value over a depth of, let's say, up to 0.7 meters with a radius of 300 meters. Gives you one effective value, which is, of course, interesting, especially in agriculturally managed fields. I mean, if you go into a forest site, it's easy to establish a soil moisture network that is there for the whole time. If you go into a cropped system, then it becomes much more difficult to have many of these sensors. When the farmer plows and so on, they need to be removed, you need to put them back. If you want to have an information about the effective change of soil moisture content in time, then these cosmic ray sensors are very interesting to look at. And so what you see here is that what the sensor is measuring. These are the fast neutrons that are coming out of the soil. And this is what, and we've put this sensor in the midst of our soil moisture network, and this is what the dark line is that what our soil moisture sensor network system is measuring, and this is what the cosmic ray sensor is measuring when it's translated, when you translate the nutrients into soil water contents. And you might say, okay, well, it looks quite reasonable, but you see that there are still differences. Here, the cosmic ray sensor reacts much faster than the soil moisture sensor. So soil moisture is at 5 centimeters. The cosmic ray is on top of the soil. And you see that we sometimes have these differences here, and here it appears to even move apart. So, and this is also for that was a grassland site. We have done the same work for this catchment site, where we have all these soil moisture networks. And this is what the cosmic ray is measuring. And you see again, this is the cosmic ray signal, and this is the soil water content of the soil moisture network. So we see that we have differences that need to be explained. And for us, the reason is, why does this happen? Now, what the cosmic ray basically measures is, of course, the hydrogen pools in the footprint. So everywhere where there is hydrogen, that's what the cosmic ray sensor measures. And you can see this is a wet catchment, this is an averaged, and this is a drier catchment. And you see the proportional change of the percentage of hydrogen that contributes to the signal. And you can see, of course, here you see, for instance, the soil water content. As it gets drier and drier, so the proportion of hydrogens that contribute to that signal is much more important. You can also look at the above biomass and the different factors that contribute. Here you see organic matter, root matter, and lattice water, and this increases with the dryness of the catchment. So the idea was that litter might perhaps in a forest soil play an important role because it may store a lot of water. It's not measured by the soil water content sensor, but it's seen by the cosmic ray sensor. Just to give you an idea about the effective sensor depth versus the soil water content for different combinations of hydrogen pools. So here you have the soil water content, and here you have the effective measurement depth of the cosmic ray sensor. So that means the drier the soil, the deeper the sensor looks into the soil profile. The wetter it gets, the less deep the measurements are. So you have also, independent of soil water content, a different measurement volume of the system. You need to take that into account when you evaluate the data. And here you can see the effects of soil water content, organic matter, lattice water, root biomass, and you see that, of course, it has an effect in function, especially as the soil gets drier, that this leads to differences in the sensing depth of the sensor. So basically, it's a good reason to take them into account. Another issue is the sensitivity of the system. And this is also dependent on the soil water content. So if your soil is very dry, you only need a few hours to measure to get a quite low standard deviation. The wetter the system gets, the longer you need to measure to obtain a low standard deviation. So that means your system gets less and less sensitive. What we try to do is how to account for the effect of the litter layer. And we did this in a numerical simulation. We used the 1D Richards equation, and we used the soil profile at the catchment site, and we used Peter transfer functions to estimate the Moalen-van Genuchten parameter, which characterizes the water flow, and we inversely estimated these parameters and used Peter transfer functions to characterize the parameters of the Van Genuchten-Moalen model that is used in a numerical simulation to look at water flow. And what we then did, and these are the different horizons that we have been looking at, and here you see the simulation results. And you see here the simulation results of soil water content for the 5 centimeter depth and the litter. You see the simulations of at the 20 centimeter depth, and you see the simulations of the 50 centimeter depth. And the red one is a simulation, and the blue one are the measured values. So you see a quite good correspondence at 20 and 50 centimeters. And here you see the precipitation, and then the darker line is the measurement, and then the yellow is the litter, and the red is the measurement or the simulation at 5 centimeters. And the peaks here, they are strong rainfall events. So what we then did was we used the SolNet calibration, and we used this without lidar and with lidar. And the idea was that lidar would improve substantially the comparison between what we measure with the cosmic ray and the SolNet. But basically what you see, there is nothing much to be gained by accounting for the soil lidar. So the idea in the beginning that the deviations we had there at the Wüsterbach site, at the forested site, were due to lidar cannot really be corroborated. So, and then we just looked at different cases. And the first case is you do a calibration using the uncorrelated fast neutron count. So you directly use the neutron counts and you relate it to soil water content. Then you get a root mean square error of 0.09 cubic centimeters per cubic centimeter, which is quite large. And then you do a correction for atmospheric pressure, air humidity, and incoming radiation, because the sensor, what he measures also depends on the radiation that is incoming, and that might be dependent on time. And then you see that this is the largest gain that you can get compared even to the other cases. So the largest gain is including or accounting for atmospheric pressure effects, air humidity, and incoming radiations. All the other corrections that you have been doing, is account for below ground hydrogen pools, litter, and then litter layer and below ground only slightly improves the root mean square error. So this tells us that we still have some work to do when we are using the cosmic ray sensor. What I've shown now is just measuring state variables. What I want to tell you about now is how can one go from state variables to prediction of fluxes. And what we have been using in this case are data assimilation techniques. That means we integrate our observation into our model and we improve our prediction based on the observation. This is typically done in meteorology and weather forecast, where measurements of temperature and humidity are used to improve the prediction of the weather for the next 5 to 10 days. And the idea would be to say, okay, we have a lot of, let's say, systems that measure system states. You have the rainfall radar in this case, you have satellite data, you have your monitoring networks, you have moisture content, and then you would use, let's say, a hydrological model combined with a weather model, and then you could use that to forwardly predict evapotranspiration for the next 5 to 10 days. That would be something like doing real-time management of your agricultural fields. And so and I will explain how assimilation works. And we have used different techniques, not that important, but it is very simple. You start with a forward simulation of your hydrology, and you want to predict soil moisture content. At the same time, at a certain moment in time, you have a measurement available. Then what this data assimilation technique, the Kalman filter, does is, it weighs optimally your measurement and your model. So the more accurate your measurement is, the more the model calculation will be distorted to your measurement. If your measurement is much more uncertain than your model, then the model is more true than your measurement. So you adapt the state, you do the next calculations, and at a certain moment in time, you again have data available, and you again optimally weigh your model with the data. And so you are continuously correcting your measurements, your simulation results. What we do on top of it is not only change the state, we also change the parameters. So we have a dual update of state, so moisture content, and parameters like the Moalen van Genuchten parameters I've shown in the cosmic ray. So we, at the same time, update them. And this is just an example of an, let's say, in this case, discharge versus time. And you see here the different simulations of the discharge. And at a certain moment in time, we get discharge data available, and we really compress all these ensemble models to be pretty close to the measurement. And then the calculations continue. These are many more calculations, and each moment in time when we have a measurement available, we update the state, but at the same time we can update, for instance, the hydraulic conductivity. And you see in the beginning there is a wide spread of possible hydraulic conductivity values, and as the simulation proceeds in time, we are narrowing down the distribution of this parameter. And so this allows us to get also estimates about the parameter value and its distribution. And this is, of course, an interesting approach. It has been applied in the last few years, especially in hydrology, to update at the same time your states, moisture content, and also get information about the parameters. And this is illustrated here for using a specific type of a specific type of data assimilation method for saltwater content. And what you see here, the red is the observation, and the blue line is what we call the filtered result. That means that what is reached by using state update and parameter update of the hydraulic properties. And this is the initial guess that one would get when one uses, for instance, lab data. If you use lab data and you put these lab data for the hydraulic conductivity and the moisture retention characteristic in your model, this is what you get. And you can do that for the different depths. And what the system does is it updates moisture and hydraulic conductivity and the moisture retention characteristic, and you see that we are then able to retrieve the soil moisture profile quite accurately, at the expense, of course, of having to have this additional updates of parameters. And what you then also get, and this is, for instance, the porosity. These are the parameters of the Van Genuchten equation for the different depths. You get information about the change of the probability density function of these parameters in function of time. And you can also see whether they are biased, yes or no, with respect to the lab measurements. And sometimes you can see that we have considerable differences between what is measured in the lab and what basically is obtained from the assimilation procedure. The nice thing about these techniques is that you can also predict the fluxes, which are difficult to measure. The drainage flux is typically difficult to measure in the field. And these are examples from lysimeter data that we have been using. And you can see that the observed one is the red one, and this is the first guess. And then we have been using data assimilation techniques, and you can see that this one is then pretty much or pretty well matching the observed data, and the same is true for evapotranspiration. So the advantage of the data assimilation techniques is you can use your state variables, you update also your parameters, and you get also improved estimates of your fluxes. This is the basic principle, and that opens, of course, perspectives to get information also in a forecast mode of evapotranspiration. So a few remarks. Briefly, the TERENO sites, which I've shown you, the website, and also the instrumentation is up and running, and if you want, you can visit this website, and you can also download the data. So some of the data that I've shown here on some moisture content, you can just simply download them by clicking on the sensor, and you get the data. The wireless sensor networks, which I presented, are, in my opinion, viable tools for the analysis of soil moisture variability. It gives you a unique data set, and it allows you to study in detail hydrological processes at an extent, to my personal opinion, not yet possible, what's not possible in the past, but is now possible due to these techniques. And I've tried to show indicating that this might also be used to manage water resources at larger scale, because you're able to predict fluxes. You can do that also in a forward mode using these data assimilation techniques. And I guess that provides also the opportunities to integrate remotely sensed data into models, and that might also help in better managing the agricultural systems. Yeah, and with this, I would like to stop. Thank you for your attention, and happy to take any questions.
Well, thanks very much, Harry. We have time for some questions. I know those students from class are bursting to ask questions. Students from the class. Yes, great.
Hi, yeah, I was wondering, with the bimodal soil distribution, soil moisture content distribution you showed during the wetting phase, were you able to attribute that to any sort of flow processes or soil properties?
Yeah. Well, the idea is the bimodality is there are several reasons that are invoked to explain bimodality. One would be, at a larger scale, what is called fractional precipitation. That means you have an area, and at a certain region in that area, you have a higher precipitation than in the other region. That would mean you have a bimodal distribution, because at that spot it's wetter, the other one is drier. In this case of the catchment, it is basically the riparian zone, which is always wetter than the uphill zone. Now, if it starts, and if you have a rainfall event and it's homogeneously distributed, then you can imagine at the beginning you have a bimodal system. And it might also be enforced, but when it starts out drying, it collapses in variance. So it's just a play between the regions that are wet and dry, and the extent of them in relation to each other that causes this bimodal behavior. So it's due to the structure of the system, not to, what we think at least, not to, let's say, heterogeneous precipitation.
More students, yeah. Okay, we'll let you in anyway.
I'm a plant ecologist, so this is going to be a little bit out of left field, but there's been a lot of interesting developments in ecology with thinking about time series and state changes and an increase in variance signaling a state change from one set of processes driving the system to another set of processes. And I was curious about your observations of the variance increasing from a moist state as you transition through, and then at some point the variance goes down again because you're at that dry state. Now, you were just talking about spatial heterogeneity there, but do you see this as a time series trace, and does it signal anything about a shift in properties that are driving the system behavior?
I don't see directly a shift in the properties of the system behavior. I mean, what is changing is, of course, the soil moisture content. That is changing. This is basically the system behavior is that soil moisture, and this is for the topsoil layer, I have to mention that. So soil moisture content is changing, and basically, due to the structure of the catchment, you get patches of dryness and wetness, and this is basically the interplay between both of them. So it has nothing to do with an evolution of the properties, of the material properties of the system in time. It is just the reaction of the state of the system to changes. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does, and I have to admit to a lot of ignorance here, but I guess the scenario I was wondering is, presumably you have different physical properties that are driving that drying signal. You might have bulk flow of moisture, you might have diffusion, capillary forces operating at different time, dominating the response.
But I think it's just very simple, the wetting and the drying and the way you describe it. And the issue is, of course, you use always the variance and the mean to describe also something that is bimodal. And that means, that shows that the bimodal distributions are broader than the drying distributions. And this is expressed in the variance. So perhaps one should also consider having calculated the weighting variance of two distributions that end up in a bimodal one. And then I think it's also an issue of how do you characterize the probability density function. That is definitely also an issue. And perhaps this hysteresis might be, let's say, more of also an issue of characterizing the system. But if you then look into the probability density functions, you see that there is also a mechanism behind it, and that tells you it goes from bimodal to univariate. So there is something happening with the system, the state of the system. And that means your bimodality is lost when the system dries out. So it gets more uniform. That's basically what is happening.
Yes.
As all of us know, the soil water management is a big challenge, right? So recently I noticed that many papers published about time stability of soil water content. Because this can reduce the number of sensors, right? But if we want to use this method to find the benchmark point, we have need intensive measurement before that, right?
Yes.
But some people say we can find the relationship between degree of time stability and the soil and the topography, then locate at that point.
Yes.
But maybe the results obtained in this area not suitable to other areas.
Yes.
So I want to ask what's your opinion about this, what's your comment, and what's the possible way in the future for this? Thanks.
So the issue is that you talk about temporal stability. So that means you have, first for the audience, you have locations in the field that over a certain period of time are always the driest or the wettest.
Yeah.
And you have always a location that you can identify that reflects the mean water content for the time period you're looking at. And this was found by Georges Vachot in '85. And it has been used, for instance, to reduce the number of measurements that are needed, because if you know that that point is always the wettest, that one is the driest, and I have the mean, I could do it with 3, and then I have at least information about the range of water content. The big issue is what are the driving factors, the controls on this soil moisture stability. And the work started recently in looking at the properties that might affect this stability. And this is now ongoing work, and the issue is basically between local and non-local controls. So the local control is, let's say, the vertical fluxes, is the evapotranspiration, the rainfall, but you also have lateral fluxes that might destroy the signal. So you will need, let's say, a mechanistic analysis of this temporal stability using mathematical models, and then you probably can transfer some of your knowledge to other areas. I think that was a question you were asked, can you transfer it from one to another place? Is it? Yeah. So, and then you need to identify the controls that lead to this temporal stability. And this is now work that is ongoing, you're right, in the recent 3 to 4 years. Several papers have been published looking at this temporal stability. Yeah. Mainly, let's say it's interesting for remote sensing. That was the main, one of the drivers is remote sensing, because if you know that this pixel is always the wettest or the driest, and this pixel always represents the mean average of the area you're looking at, it helps you in improving your validation calibration. And that might also be used then to transfer to other regions, this temporal stability analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Ali.
Thanks a lot for the very interesting talk. I was very interested with the diagram that you show on picture on slide number 8, which was actually showing how you transfer the hydrology into an electromagnetic problem, and then you try to match the parameters by actually looking at the signals. I was wondering what would be the effect of if you have different soil layers, because you mentioned that by that procedure you're going to basically match the parameters for the top soil. So if you have a multi-layer, what's going to be the case?
Okay, but the simulation is done for the whole profile. But you're only basically updating the information from the top layer. So your hydrological model, I have to perhaps go back, does the whole profile. Slide 8. This one here.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. But this models the whole soil profile. But of course, you can only constrain then the electromagnetic properties by the information that is measured by the sensor here. And this is typically the top layer. But what you do is you update, of course, only the parameters for the top soil layer. You could also do the lower ones, but there's not enough.
So the point is that how much would be, so for instance, consider if you have the lower soil based on a priori estimates or even with another calibration technique. So what would be the uncertainty propagation because of the, the wrong estimation of the lower soil layer? How can actually it affect your top soil parameter characteristic estimation?
That's a good question, but as I said, there's no information available in your measurement signal to do so. So you have not enough information to update that. You would need additional information to do so.
Thanks.
That's right. So this is basically a kind of regularization that one is using. One is constraining the possible solutions, the solution space, by limiting the possible states of soil moisture. This is basically what is being doing. If you would only do it in this direct way, you measure the electromagnetic properties and you do a direct inversion, and then you are not constraining this with realistic soil moisture content values, then you get also bad estimates of your geophysical parameters.
Good. Well, we're just coming up to 5 o'clock, so before I thank Harry, I want to make a couple of announcements. Next week we don't have a talk, so next week is a reading break, a study break from this class, and the following week we have Leroy Poff with us. Leroy is coming from Colorado State University, and he's really the top person in ecological flows. So these are in-stream flows and rivers for ecological purposes. We want to encourage the Water Security Agency to take part in that visit, because there are a lot of connections between what Leroy's doing and what is going on here in the province. We hope some of you will join us at Alexander's afterwards. Many things to still talk about with Harry. I'm eager now to buy an ERT. I want to know which one to buy, and if you can put it out in the rain and look at snapshots through an event, I think that would be really quite exciting. So again, I hope you can join me to thank Harry, and we'll see you later at Alexander's.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And students will meet down front as per usual.